This is Chris Batten. Good morning. And Chud Wendell is unavailable to lead us today. He is actually he's on vacation, well-deserved break. I think he might actually be on the phone driving in from Ponderay. So anyway, I'm going to kick this off real quick and just kind of get this thing going. Remind everybody kind of the purpose of this meeting is it's kind of intended to be kind of a neighborhood council type meeting and to assist city agencies in determining priorities needed. Right now on our Facebook page, we have 629 members and growing. So that's good. Chud always likes to remind us, no politics, no agendas, no BS. Education and advocacy is what we're about. And then we meet every
bunch of other stuff.
We meet every second Wednesday of the month at 9 a.m. on these Zoom meetings. So communications, we reach out to everybody via email and Facebook. And then, the call to action is, we got to get people involved. We have to have power in numbers and invite people from the business communities, property owners and business owners to join the group to have a voice in what's being said. We've got the Facebook page. It's a great place to post any pictures. It's important that we report the crime that we see when we see it, and engage on Facebook and get people to interact. So anyway, we've got a pretty good agenda today, and we're going to try to keep it to an hour. That's always important, kind of respecting everybody's schedule. So I want to see, do we have Mark? Mark, are you on the line from Houston?
Yes, sir.
All right, Darren, I'm going to hand this off to you and let you introduce Mark.
Fantastic. As you know, one of the things in this group we've been trying to do is to come up with solutions for the city, solutions that work. And what we've done is look for models around the country, as we've talked about some things from San Diego, we've talked from Marysville and things like that. But one of the best city models that we'd like to take a look at least from the outside, is that it is a city that has, for all intents and purposes, reduced its homeless population to the lowest level of any major metropolitan in the United States. In fact, if the numbers are to be believed that we heard from Commerce, technically the city of Spokane has more homeless people than the city of Houston, which has 7 million people. Now, Mark is here. I met Mark through the mayor's office in Houston, and our 10-minute introductory conversation turned to well over an hour. He's a wealth of information. We've asked him to just at least come to us and say, how did you get started, to help us, because that's kind of where we're at on this journey. So Mark, if you could step in and help out here, talk to us. Tell me where you were at the beginning. And I know oftentimes it seems like it's a bit hopeless in trying to deal with the situation. It seems like a big iceberg. Tell me how you how you started, and what recommendations you might have for a city that's in the similar place that Houston was in several years ago.
For sure. No, I appreciate it, Darren, and thank you all for letting me join. As Darren said, I can get rocking and rolling and talking for a long time. And so I want to make sure to get you the information that can be helpful for you and answer the questions that y'all have. I think the first one is a misnomer that since the start of the focus on housing first, that has caused homelessness to increase. And what we have found is that it's not, there's no causation between the two. There is some correlation, and that's because it's the correlation with wage stagnation, increasing rents, lack of affordable housing. If you're on Medicare and Medicaid, at least in Texas, it's not even enough to pay for your housing. So, all those drivers are driving individuals to, fall into homelessness over the past 10 years. And it's not the focus on housing first that's created a homeless, it's all these other upward systems. The homeless system doesn't create homelessness. We're like a hospital. Hospital, in most cases, don't create sick patients, but it's their duty to respond to it. And a lot of times homelessness is the symptom of other failed systems, the justice system, the education system, the aging out foster care system, the veteran system, and we can go on and on and on and on. But it's the homeless system that's the last safety net. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen real quick. And I'm going to fly through this presentation. So I apologize for speaking so quickly. Now, if I can just get, the Zoom bar is blocking my PowerPoint bar. So just 1 second. My apologies. There we go. Okay, so Houston in 2011, we had over 8,500 individuals who were experiencing homelessness. We had the sixth largest population in the country. And that's really because we were so focused on managing the issue. So especially managing the symptoms. All the focus went to, let's provide food, let's provide clothing, let's provide even shelter. And none of that was actually solving it. So we said, we got to change what we're doing. And it really, the key we find in most jurisdictions is it takes very high level elected leadership to champion it. So we said, let's change from managing to solving it. And it was the mayor who said, we're spending getting a little testing. Darren, you're on mute.
We have members who haven't muted. If you could mute, please, so we can continue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So the mayor said we were spending tens of millions of dollars on this issue, and every organization would parade out an anecdotal story of success, but we weren't moving the needle. And so she challenged. She said, "No more. Are we going to keep on doing the same things the own ways? Like the private sector, we're going to start looking at the ROI." And see, and that's where we're going to invest our dollars. Whatever is going to get us the biggest bang for the buck, and not managing, but solving the issue. So we did it two ways, and I'm sorry this is a little bit blurry here. The second one, we did it with unprecedented. We don't call it collaboration; we call it collective impact. Because if you were to go to your homeless agencies today and say, "Are you collaborating?" They said they are. And when you in Houston, we would ask further, and it'd be like, "Well, they're going to lunch with another executive director from a different agency, or they're coming together for a sock drive during Christmas time." What we're talking about is really the day-to-day activities and resources being intertwined. That level of collaboration. So we call it collective impact, and it is a public-private sector response. And so we're getting money from the philanthropic community. We have the private sector. My salary was initially paid for by Chevron. Our downtown management districts and are putting money into it. And they're not just putting money into the issue of homelessness. Everybody's putting money and support to one plan, one regional plan that everybody works off. And then that plan uses evidence-based practices. These are the best practices based on evidence. So once again, you got a bunch of agencies working on homelessness, all doing their own thing, their own way, with their own goals. Now we actually operate a well-oiled system where everybody coordinates their efforts and resources to maximize impact. And we have over 100 different agencies with the shared goals, using the same strategies, with the same plan, all part of what we have called the way home. And the basic tenet of you're homeless. So how do you fix that? You put somebody in a home, and they are no longer homeless. We're not trying to fix people. And so, the typical person, if they're suffering from substance abuse, has to go to rehab 7 times on average. We don't have time to wait. So the very first thing we want to do is we want to just put people into homes. And what we found out is that people don't need to be fixed to be placed in homes. Of all the people we've housed, 90% are still housed. So a lot of times people would say, "Oh man, they can't be housed. Look at them." The reality is they can be housed, and they will actually stay housed. And there's lots of substance abuse and behavioral health in outside of homelessness. The difference is you don't see it. Your neighbor could be suffering from behavioral health, but it's happening in the confines and privacy of their own home. The homeless, you see it on the streets because they don't have a place to go. So that's where we're going. We're saying the very first thing, let's put them in a house. That's housing first. It gets rid of the normal barriers. So everybody knows transitional housing. Often it came with lots of barriers. hey, you got to stop drinking, you got to stop smoking, you got to go to these classes every single day, or you got to do X, Y, and Z before we'll even house you. So if somebody who's been on the streets for an extended period of time, they'll say, forget that. I'll just stay on the streets. So what Housing First does, it gets rid of all those barriers. No requirements. First thing we do is we put you into housing. And this is huge. It is not a shelter-based system. The big difference between Houston and a lot of other systems out there is we are not a shelter-based system. In fact, we don't publicly fund any shelters. Shelters are very important, but they're no longer the solution. Shelters are important because they are the front door, the main front door into our housing system, into getting people on the road to being housed. It's data proven. It is the best practice. The national rate is 80% of keeping people housed long-term. Houston, we're at 90, as I said. It's all about individual choice. The reality is that skilled practitioners make the client feel like it's their choice, even when it's not. But the reason why we build in individual choice is because people tend to engage more, and the outcomes end up being more successful. There is this myth out there that housing first means we're just putting in people into housing and that's it. And it's wrong. It's housing and services. We house them first, and then we connect the supportive services to them. We will not house anybody without supportive services tied to the unit. The supportive services is what keeps the person housed. The housing is what makes the supportive services effective. So it's an inverse relationship. Providing somebody on the streets with supportive services, you're just spinning your wheels. I mean, it's hard to even consistently, locate the client, let alone to get their attention so that the services can take hold and be effective when they're worried about when they're gonna, where they're gonna get their next meal and where they're gonna be staying. The only services I know to truly be effective are once the person has safe and stable housing. There's three things you gotta have. You gotta have the housing unit. You gotta pay for the rental assistance and supportive services. The main way we pay for rental assistance, and this is huge, is that through Section 8 low-income housing vouchers. So our housing authorities prioritize the homeless for these vouchers. And that's the primary way we pay for the rent. Lots of cities have tried. Without that, it's very difficult. Here's one thing. Houston puts no local government dollars into homelessness. We're the only major city not to. I would not advise that. It's not good. But we primarily target our federal resources, but it's caused us to have to get smarter. And it caused us to have to collaborate together, to use best practices, and to look for other resources out there. So this is what most people think of as supportive housing, homeless housing. This is a lineup at a shelter. This is not in Houston. This is homeless housing that the city has invested in various neighborhoods. And most people have no idea it's predominantly for individuals who are homeless. We don't have the time nor money to build from the ground up, so we look for scattered site units throughout the region. So these are market units. Sometimes we're getting one unit, 5 or 20 at different apartment complexes across. And we can talk about what's in it for the apartment owner. There's lots of incentives. Houston, we were operating at 90% occupancy. So we're not like a lot of the West Coast jurisdictions that are at 99% occupancy. But that's why some of the jurisdictions, and even Houston's looking at it right now, buying up motels and hotels, especially with the COVID dollars that are coming in, and not buying the motels to temporarily put people in. Houston did not do that. We did not, during COVID, put a bunch of people into motels or hotels because we didn't have that next step. Like, what are we going to do with these people? You want us to just kick them out of the motels and hotels when it's done? Cities are getting smart and they're buying up hotels and motels to operate as permanent housing. What that means is you're not spending 3 years in pre-development and development costs because you don't have time, because you want to react now. So once they're housed, you get a whole slew of supportive services that get tailored to the individual's needs. How do you house a bunch of people? Listen, the days of old of working off a spreadsheet is not bringing a system to scale. And so we have an entire system called coordinated access. Every jurisdiction by the Fed is required by the feds to use coordinated entry system. However, not all of them really bring it to scale and use it the way it should be, or the level that Houston uses it. What it does is it allows that every single agency that a homeless individual may engage with, they can be assessed through this online system. It standardizes the assessment. And then at the end of it, it's going to pop up the right type of intervention for them. It's going to talk about what programs are available, if they're eligible for it, if there is beds that are available, and they can do a real-time referral and wait list. So no longer does it mean the homeless person has to talk to the right person in the right agency on the right day, the right time, with the right knowledge of some magical unit that might be available for them. This does it all. And this is the single entry. This is the sole referral source for homeless housing. Because in the past, agencies would only take the clients that they felt would do good in their programs, because that would boost their success rates, which would boost their funding from funders. And so now we said, no more of that. You can't just deny people. You got to take them. And we will go talk to the funders. The city went and talked to the funders and said, hey, can we change the way your grant applications are? Instead of valuing how many people you're serving, let's value how many, let's have less people that they're serving, but they're serving the right people, because they're more vulnerable. They take more time. And that's a lot of times why outreach wouldn't serve the folks. So the housing assessor assesses them. The housing navigator, because we're using only federal funds, gets all their paperwork together because they are signing a lease. That's the real name for permanent, for Housing First. Housing First doesn't mean you get a house for eternity. For some people, it does, because they need it. They are very vulnerable, have disabilities, and are non-able bodied. But for a lot of people, they don't need long-term housing. They need even short-term housing. The reason why it's called permanent housing is because they're doing their own lease. So even when they are done or graduate from the program, they can continue to stay in that unit and pay themselves. But before, transitional housing so often would be, once you graduate, then you leave that unit and now you're back to square one, trying to find a magical apartment out there that would be willing to lease to you, which might have been the reason why you were homeless in the first place. And then after they're housed, that case manager takes over. Right now in Houston, we have over 7,100 units of permanent housing. We had to create a structure and lead agencies, and I'll get into that because I know that really gets to the crux of how we really started. On this timeline, you'll see in 2000, we got in trouble, and we were named a priority community by HUD, which is not a good designation. But what that came with was technical assistance help. And we really use that technical assistance help. And we said, let's start with a pilot. And at this time, underneath the Obama administration, veterans were the priority. So we said, let's come around the table, everybody working together, and house 100 veterans in 100 days. And we did that. And we were working off spreadsheets. And then we said, let's try housing 300 veterans in 100 days. And we did that. And that really showed folks that, yes, folks actually do want housing. The reason they're on the streets is they don't want shelter, and they won't go to a shelter. And unfortunately, constitutionally, you can't force people to go to shelter if they don't want to. However, they do want housing, and they will take us up on housing. And it also showed us what could be achieved if we actually all work together. And we stopped and we created a method to the madness. And from that came, we just did a 3-day community charrette, and this is a little bit different. We're not Spokane, we're not Seattle, we're not San Francisco, we're not Austin, we're not Denver. We operate very quickly here in Houston. So we did a 3-day community charrette with a lot of people there, and from that said, let's create an actual system that everybody's part of, and let's use housing as it. We didn't have to have 40 community meetings spread over a year and hire consultants to do cost analysis. We used actually the cost reports that other cities did to show it was actually cheaper to house individuals with supportive services than it is to walk by them on the streets. We didn't spend the money or spend a year doing those studies. We operate very quickly. We don't let the perfect get in the way of the good. So we create a plan that is good enough to get started, and then we modify it as it goes on. But we don't get paralyzed in the planning, because then that can eat up that time and make matters even worse. In starting, you can see here this direct causation between the folks we were housing in the blue and our point in time counts. Started to decrease for the first time from when we started this in 2012. And since 2012, we've permanently housed over 23,000 individuals. And this is the reality. The reality is that if we arrest people, most DAs aren't taking cases anymore for civility ordinance issues. And if even they do, they're going to be out the next day. They might even be out within hours. They're going to be right back on the streets. And so the reality is, and if we go offer shelter, that can check the box to allow us to do enforcement. But the reality is, what we find is 98% of the people don't want shelter on the streets. And so what they're going to do is just move down to the next block, or they'll hide behind the trees until the police leave and they'll come right back. And so just shutting down encampments is just going to move the folks over to the next block or deeper into neighborhoods or places that are least desirable than where they even were to begin with. What housing does is it removes them completely off the streets. And that's why we're so focused on it. There's so many other things that are constantly tapping on the shoulders of elected officials and the public, but they're distractions, such as shower buses. Once again, you have limited financial resources and you have limited resources in manpower and time from your agencies. Focusing it on shower resources, great. You have cleaner, maybe better to look at, better to smell homeless individuals. They're still on the streets. Those are those kitschy type of solutions that always gets pitched. Panhandling bans. It gets used, but does it reduce panhandling? Does it have an impact? No, even if they're being utilized. Creating sanctioned campsites. So Seattle, of course, was one of the first ones to really do this, and they've expanded it. They have all these sanctioned campsites. And what we found is that it actually is sometimes, in most cases, cheaper just to house the folks. Because if the government's creating a sanctioned campsite, they're having to pay for security. They're having to pay for porta cans. They're having to pay for shower trailers. They're having to pay for 24/7 monitoring. They're having, all those really add up. And at the end of the day, it's often just cheaper to do the housing. But the big piece with it, sanctioned campsites, is you can create all these campsites and they will be utilized. But once again, the judging success should not be on utilization. It should be on impact. So the question about sanctioned campsites is it reducing all the other unsanctioned campsites? Is it reducing your unsheltered population? And as Seattle and other jurisdictions show, it has no impact. It has no effect, even if they're being utilized. This is our overall, within that first year of starting our initiative in 2012, you can see we used to have more people on the streets, that green line, but now we've changed that. We have more homeless in our shelters than in the streets. We had our first increase, and that was due to Hurricane Harvey. We've still had trouble recovering from Hurricane Harvey, and that was all seen on the streets. However, this year we still did a count, and we had a 30% reduction in homelessness. And that is really tied towards, we did a homeless housing initiative, and we used all of our COVID dollars to do it. To date, we basically have housed 4,000 individuals in 8 months. And housing 1,000 individuals right the month before the count obviously had an impact and helped out. And this
so
is
Mark,
us comparing.
I hate to jump in here, but
Yeah,
we're wrapping up our time here. Honestly, I can't. One of the lessons that I took away from our last conversation was that centralizing all of these services under one banner and treating it like a business approach. What is the name of the organization that you have there that now leads this challenge for your region's homeless issues? Okay,
so the first thing to understand, this is not my long answer to your short question, is that every jurisdiction has a continuum of care, and Spokane has that. In fact, they might have a couple. The county might have its own, the city might have its own, and there's others. And that continuum of care gets the largest amount of federal dollars. It bypasses the city and bypasses the county. What we decided in Houston was first to make it regional. So we have 3 counties that are all part of our continuum of care with the city. And so, it doesn't matter, it shouldn't matter what side of the street the individual is on, who can serve them. And, homelessness is fluid, so we look at it as a regional approach. The second thing is that lots of places, and maybe even that's the same in Spokane. I know you guys have an interagency council to end homelessness. And there's a lot of agencies. We decide, let's just use the continuum of care to do that. It has its own steering committee, and it has a lead administrative agency. That lead administrative agency can be various things. Different agencies use different jurisdictions use different agencies. For us, we used the lead agency for a continuum of care, and it happens to be the Coalition for the Homeless. In other jurisdictions, it can be different. But we said, let's not make new things. Let's use pre-existing structure that's already built. So we have, what we found is very important is having an independent third-party lead administrating coordinating agency. If it lived with the city, then the county probably wouldn't want to join in, because they don't, this is the city, we're the county, and so if it was just the city, other cities might not want to be part of it. If it was just the city, the homeless activists might not even trust it, and the agencies might not be. So the city is the main partner, and we provide most of the funding, and we provide a lot of leadership, but it does not live and die with the cities. It is the community's plan that happens to be the city's plan, not the other way around.
Fantastic. Mark, I can't tell you how exciting this is. If you have a chance to send your slides out just so we can have something for reference, just send it to me as an email. I'll make sure the rest of the group gets it. Mark?
No, I appreciate that. And Darren, I just want to mention one thing, is that the private sector is huge on this. And the elected officials need the support of the private sector if the elected officials are going to stay focused to solving it. And that's where the support, not just financial support, it's political support, saying we're here with you. If we're going to ask for people's patience because we're going to do the long-term game to actually reduce numbers, and you're going to do it the right way, we have your back. And that's really, really important.
Fantastic, Mark. Thank you so much for showing us an example of a city that I think does a lot of things right, and some great ideas that we have here for Spokane. Mark, thank you again. And I'll turn it back over to you, Chris.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Hey, Mark, thank you very much. And if you can send Darren the slides, we'd all love to see those and take what we can from that and go from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
We were supposed to have Sheldon Jackson give us his update on the hotspots. Unfortunately, his mic is not working today. So he did put comments into the chat box, so anybody can go in there and take a look at that. I will say, the time, energy, and effort that not only Sheldon but Chud personally put into this is huge. Sheldon goes out every morning. I think he must get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, but he goes out every morning and does a survey of hot spots downtown. I think we've got 11 of them on the list, and he sends out a report every single morning. So it gives us a record to kind of track, how are we doing? How is the city doing? Are we making progress? And my assessment is, I think the city has received that well. Johnny Perkins has stepped up to that. And so we're starting to see some improvement on those hotspots. And I think one thing that is interesting, I think Johnny will come on here in a little bit and give us an update on his own. But what's interesting to me is I think we have 11 that we talk about every day. I think Johnny's got 26 or 32 or something like that on his list. So he's got a long list of hotspots that he's dealing with. He was supposed to be here at 9:30. And so I don't know if, Johnny, are you here yet? I think I can hear you. Hey, Scotty, is Johnny there? Okay. All right. Maybe what we'll do then is Captain Singley on board yet?
Yeah, Chris, I'm here.
So maybe we'll move Dave up a little bit, and Dave can give us SPD's update on the most recent legislative laws and kind of give us their position on the impact of those laws. And then what we'll do is we'll circle back to Johnny after Dave. Dave?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, my name's Dave Singley. I'm the downtown precinct captain. And recently I had provided some information to the DSP and bid boards on some of the impacts of the new police reforms. And you had asked if I would give that same information to this group. So there were a variety of police reform legislation that was passed. Most of it went into effect on July 25th. There's a lot of ongoing discussion about how that's going to impact departments. We're hoping to get some clarification on some of these issues from the Attorney General, but nonetheless, these things all became law on July 25th. So One of the main ones that has caused some changes for us is in the use of force. So the law now only allows officers to use force if they have probable cause to make an arrest or to protect somebody from imminent harm. It doesn't allow it for mental health detentions, Terry stops, things like that. So, and the reality of that is, prior to this, we used to be able to detain and use force even if we had less than the threshold of probable cause. So what is termed reasonable suspicion. And that came out of a federal case, Terry v. Ohio. That's why we call them Terry stops. So, but the impact, as we've seen it, is can be with a variety of police calls. One of the ones that we saw the day that I gave the presentation to the DSP board was in domestic violence cases. So oftentimes we'll get calls to suspected DV assaults, but we don't have all the information. And so you have officers that can go to a scene of suspected, fight between a man and a woman, and the man takes off when officers get there. Previously, we could detain that person and use force if necessary. Now we can't. If we don't have that probable cause yet, we are not authorized to use force to detain that person. And as I said, we had an example of that the day that I gave that presentation. The officers were out with a possible DV suspect that walked away, and then they had to let him walk away because they didn't develop probable cause yet. And then after he left, they were able to develop probable cause. And we've seen similar examples throughout the state, robberies, things like that. Reasonable suspicion detentions are something that officers typically have done fairly routinely, and so now we're having to shift how we respond to those accordingly. Part of that same use of force law requires us now to, quote, exhaust available and appropriate de-escalation tactics before using any force. But again, it doesn't clearly define what exhausting all those options means. We are also required to take as much time as necessary to avoid using force, but again, that's not defined. Does that mean we have to remain at a scene trying negotiations for X amount of hours or days, or so that part is a little vague for us in the implementation phase. It also requires us to use less lethal alternatives prior to using force, or as part of our force decision, which is something SPD has done for years now. However, at the same time, we're now prohibited from using certain military, what they considered military style weapons, and they specifically prohibit us from using anything that's greater than a 50 millimeter or a 50 caliber. So one of the impacts of that is there was no exemption in that for less lethal munitions. So by banning everything larger than 50 caliber, most agencies in Washington, including SPD, have removed 40 millimeter impact rounds and beanbag rounds from their toolkit that officers use. We're no longer able to use those, at least until there's some change or clarification in the law. And so that's actually reduced our ability to use or reduced our less lethal array of tools that we have. And we used to use 40 millimeters and beanbag rounds quite regularly, and they were very effective as a less lethal alternative. Officers, as part of this, are now required to, when they respond, if there is no probable cause that a crime is being committed or no imminent threat, they're required to leave the area as soon as possible. So we've seen that impact us in a variety of areas as well, because officers oftentimes go to calls that are not on their face crimes, maybe once they investigate a crime's been committed, but they don't know at first. Mental health calls, runaway calls. Mental health response is one that has been discussed a lot. Oftentimes officers respond to mental health calls because of the person's behavior, but it's not always a crime. And now when officers get there, if they determine that it's not a crime, they're directed to leave, even if the situation has not been necessarily fully resolved. Our behavioral health unit officers, which is a regional team of SPD, county sheriffs, and Frontier Behavioral Health with the co-deployed clinicians, they do this routinely. The other way that this can manifest itself with mental health calls is with our designated crisis responders. So by state law, those DCRs are their employees generally of Frontier here. They're authorized to issue a written directive to law enforcement to take somebody into custody to be evaluated for mental health issues. And that is based on their belief that there's some type of imminent danger to the person, whether they're gravely disabled or a threat to somebody else. And previously, we could take those orders, we could take the person into custody, and we could use reasonable force if necessary. However, now with the change to this law, there's no carve out for that. So it again falls back to the officer then having to determine if there's an imminent threat when they're there. So you could have scenarios where officers have a valid DCR order, but then they arrive on scene. The person doesn't appear to be an imminent threat to the officer based on what they can see at that moment, but the person is unwilling to go with them. So at that point, the officers have to leave as opposed to push the issue and try and force them into custody and take them to be evaluated. We can see these hanging, and we've already seen at least one that I'm aware of with runaways, where, as an example, you could have a 13-year-old, runaway hanging out downtown at 3 a.m. The Becca bill directs officers to take that child into custody and take them to a safe facility or release to parent. However, similarly now, if the officers aren't able to articulate an imminent threat to that juvenile, they're going to have to walk away if the juvenile doesn't cooperate and want to go with them voluntarily, because the alternative is they're going to have to forcibly take them into custody. So there's just a variety of calls like that and types of things that our officers go out to every day that are being impacted by this. Another change was in the vehicle pursuit law. So now officers can only pursue for a very limited number of violent crimes, and I think reasonable suspicion for DUI. SPD was already very restrictive on our pursuit policy even prior to this law. The big change in the law for us is that now officers are prohibited from pursuing, even in those specific cases, until they have obtained supervisory approval. So pursuits by their very nature are rapidly evolving incidents. You have an officer that might witness something, have to make a split-second decision whether or not to pursue based on guidelines. Now they have to be able to articulate that over the radio to a supervisor, if one's hopefully available and listening. And then that supervisor has to digest it and respond back, giving him approval prior to engaging in the pursuit. So the officers cannot follow and chase after that person at all until they get that approval. So that has effectively eliminated pursuits, because by the very nature of their split-second occurrence and response, by the time you receive that supervisory approval, generally the suspect's going to be long gone. Another impact is that we have had to retract our limited commission authority with a number of the partners that we've had locally for many years, like STA, Gonzaga, River Park Square, and Riverfront Park Security. So those entities now no longer have limited commission authority, so they cannot make some of those detentions and criminal citations that they have in the past. Another major change is that now, so previously the Criminal Justice Training Commission for the state, under a specific number of cases, that had the ability to decertify an officer, meaning to revoke their ability to be a peace officer in the state of Washington. That's been expanded, and now they have the authority to conduct an investigation on any officer or deputy anywhere in the state, essentially for anything. People can make complaints directly with the Criminal Justice Training Commission. And this is pretty new, so we don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but they have that authority with this law. And so, I mean, you could even have scenarios where officers or deputies locally are investigated by their agency and discipline placed upon them. And then you still could have the Criminal Justice Training Commission come in and investigate and decertify them. And that has major consequences for police officers, and that definitely weighs on all of them in their day-to-day decision making, because that ends your career. You can no longer be a police officer in the state of Washington, and most other states are not going to hire a Washington officer who's had his or her certification revoked. Another change was in the questioning of juveniles. So now, if you question anyone under the age of 18, you must put them in touch with an attorney before any questioning. And it doesn't say that you have to give them the opportunity to talk to an attorney. You have to actually put them in touch with an attorney before any questioning for anything. And they cannot waive that privilege. So that has essentially had the impact of pretty much eliminating our ability to interrogate any juvenile suspect. And the last one I had on my list was we talked about it before, is the Blake court decision that invalidated our felony possession of controlled substance law. And then the legislature recrafted the law to address that decision. And the end result of that was, well, they essentially changed the definition of drug paraphernalia to eliminate the vast majority of drug paraphernalia. So that's no longer a crime. Now it's really only a crime if you have the things that you would use to manufacture controlled substances, where in the past you could use anything somebody was using to ingest or take controlled substances. That was a gross misdemeanor previously. So that charge has been essentially eliminated. And then felony hard drugs, meth, heroin, cocaine, those things now are all a simple misdemeanor, which really is little more than a parking ticket. But it's not even a misdemeanor until people have been contacted and offered 2 prior diversions. And that hasn't been fully defined and outlined. So we don't know exactly what qualifies for diversions. But you're also not authorized to actually make the arrest and seize the drugs of those people until they've had the diversion opportunities. So it's not like you can see somebody shooting up heroin downtown, contact them, arrest them for that, then learn that they haven't had a diversion, document it, and let them go. You're not even authorized to legally contact them until you are aware. The officer would have to know that they have had that prior diversion opportunity, and now it's their 3rd stop, and only then could they make the arrest. But even then, it's only a simple misdemeanor. And we can't even enforce that yet locally. I'm told that council is considering adding a municipal code locally that will authorize that and outline all these procedures. But we don't have it in place today. So That's Chris. That kind of covers the ones I saw that I think are having or could potentially have the greatest impact for us.
Thanks, Dave. Hey, can you give us a quick update as property owners and business owners downtown and everywhere really on trespassing? What's the status of our ability to trespass or call SPD to trespass somebody from a property?
That still exists. I do think that there was some miscommunication about that.
Okay.
We still respond to trespassing. We can still enforce for trespassing. The part that changed a little bit was we received some guidance from city legal that they don't want us to really be brokering the kind of the initial issuing of some type of trespass notice by a property owner. But we still can and do respond if the property owner has safety concerns about giving the person some type of trespass notice. And that's really when they're in more of a public place. So if you have a store that's open to the public and they have a code of conduct that somebody's violating and they want the person trespassed, the best way to do that is to give them some type of form that trespasses them. And that's the part that SPD is not doing. However, if the person is disruptive or a safety concern and the business owner isn't comfortable trying to issue some type of paperwork, or they previously have and the person returns, that is all still completely appropriate for us to respond to, and we will respond to that.
Okay. All right. Great. Thanks, Dave. You know, in my opinion, I think this has really hampered law enforcement and really made it much, much more difficult. And from a public safety standpoint, I think this has got to be our biggest priority to figure out how do we react to this. So I really appreciate not only Dave, but Captain Meidel and everybody else for being able to stand up, stand tall, and keep talking about this, because I think it's important that everybody hears what Dave has to say. So thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
I'm going to kick it off to the city administrator, Johnny Perkins. I see he's there, and let him give you an update a little bit. He's come out with some pretty aggressive ideas, and I think we should all get behind him and support him in bringing those to fruition. So Johnny, take it away.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing? I know it's going to be a resounding fantastic. So it's nice to see all of you. I want to apologize for my tardiness. I got caught up in one of my own traffic street projects this morning, leaving my house where they're redoing Southeast Boulevard, and I didn't see the sign that said flag person ahead, and I got caught up for 10 minutes. But hey, the good news is we're making great repairs on our many city streets and roadways. So I guess putting up with 10 minutes of delay is beneficial to what ultimately the goal is there. I appreciate the opportunity. Just give you a brief overview. I'm excited on a number of fronts about what's going on here in Spokane as it relates to our issues with addressing homelessness and some of the other concerns, and really putting forward Beautify Spokane to be the cleanest, safest, best city in America. I noticed this morning, Sheldon Jackson's morning report that he provides us. I looked at the 11 spots that he visited, all of which are on our hotspot list here at the city. And I believe 9 out of 11 had either best or better. And, I went to UCLA, so math, again, is never the strong suit, but I believe that's a batting average of 818. So in the major leagues, players get paid a lot of money for batting 250. 818 is not bad. It's not greatest, because greatest is 11 out of 11 with best or better. So we still have ways to strive to go, and we will continue to do that. And I want to thank Sheldon and all the others who have stepped in and run that route in other areas to help keep us informed here at the city of areas we need to approach. And we're looking at these things from a citywide perspective. Number two, very excited about this one. Been working on this for, I don't know, maybe most of the time I've been here, but maybe not quite. But I call it the Community Graffiti Busters. Community Graffiti Busters. And on August 17th, I believe, I lose track of my calendar from time to time, we're going to be having a meeting with some of the community organizations and individuals that have put their names forward, raise their hand, if you will, and step forward to be a part of this group. And really the idea is to come together as a community, as a city, a public entity, or even the private sector. Neither one of us can do it alone. Together, we're much stronger. So we've been talking about this community graffiti busters, where we would start out with a couple Saturdays a month, identifying areas in the city where we needed to do various graffiti cleanup, getting the right materials that doesn't compromise the integrity of whatever structure or a building we need to clear graffiti off of, or wall, or anything like that. We've got community leaders who are volunteering to help us with refreshments during this. So next Tuesday will be a meeting here at City Hall to kind of walk through with city staff what that looks like. How do we put it together? How are volunteers brought in, and when we're going to start? And very excited about this with the mayor. You know, I've had conversations with other council members, including Councilmember Cathcart at Wilkerson. Certainly appreciate their support as well as the entire council. So very excited for that, and looking forward to at the next meeting, or when it's the right time, to give you an update on the success of that effort. The third thing I wanted to address briefly, I think Chris was referring to, is, you know, kind of the approach to try to do more to address homeless, litter cleanup, graffiti removal, and encampment abatement. And one of the things I'm doing next week is I'm meeting with our legal team, the city attorney's office, the police department, code enforcement, our park staff. We're really going to kind of walk through some of the ordinances, the laws, the regulations. You know, Chris was mentioning trespassing, things like that, where what is it that we truly can do as it relates to what our police officers are able to do, what our code team is able to do, what our parks rangers are able to do, and what we're able to do as a city to support the community on these various ordinances, whether they're dealing with the park ordinances, whether they're dealing with pedestrian interference, sit and lie, and or unlawful camping. And, you know, we want to make sure that the steps that we are taking are in accordance with the guidance in those ordinances and laws, that we're not infringing on anything that we shouldn't be, that we're doing it what the code specifies. And we want to do it with passion and compassion. But as we've said before, we also have to be very firm as it relates to not allowing drugs, narcotics, and other things in our community, because those are causing some of the issues today. And we need to try to help address those where we can. One final thought on sit and lie. Come to find out, sit and lie is, I'm putting my hands up in a box because that's what the area for sit and lie enforcement is. And I've had some conversations with council, and they've been receptive to the discussion about that area, maybe going outside of it. But right now, sit and lie can only be enforced Spokane Falls Boulevard to I-90, Division to Monroe. That is the area of enforcement. And then you have to make sure that there's capacity within the shelters during the day. So if you were going to enact something at 2:00, let's say, you needed to make sure there was a shelter capacity available to, in fact, initiate such an effort. So we're working with the shelter providers. We're making sure that legally we're doing this the right way. We want to work with those that need the help, those that want the help. We want to be there to do that, and then make sure that we're following the rules. So we'll have more on that later. I'll tell you, the mayor and the council is committed to addressing homelessness. You know, we want to transition individuals out of homelessness, and we want to do it, though, the right way, as I said, with compassion, with passion. But at the same time, we just got to be firm on some of the things that are going on out in our parks, in our neighborhoods, and certainly downtown. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Johnny. Hey, one thing I'm going to send you, Johnny, is an article on, I think it was Bellingham did what they're calling protection zones around some of these homeless shelters. And it really, what it is, it's to protect those most vulnerable people that need the shelters, that are there for the shelters. And I think this is something that Captain Midles talked about a little bit too. So when you're talking sit and lie, put this in the mix and talk about this too. I'm going to send that to you. I think it's an important piece.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I think that's it, everybody. Thank you. And we will be back next month. All right. Goodbye.